So, how do you buy gear? Like, what kind of thought processes do you go through when you make a purchase? For me, certainly, I have a list that I go through to help me make the best decision possible. And so today, I've compiled my top 10 gear purchases of 2021 and also go through kind of my thought processes about why I picked them and why I think they were a great purchase. Now, if you have any thoughts and great purchases and advice that you'd like to give me, please leave it below in the comments. And I'd love to check them out to learn from you, and we can all share. So let's get to it. Is there something that I already own that can do the same? And this is an important question because I think myself and maybe others included have a tendency and a bias towards a certain type of gear. And I find myself accumulating similar types of gear consistently. And so while that's not a bad thing, I want to make sure that I check myself like that's a deliberate decision, right? Instead of inadvertently getting the same things and having redundancy and almost like a glut of a certain type of thing. Because I think diversity in gear purchases is very important. And if you already own something that kind of does the same thing, you have to really ask yourself really hard, like, do you really need another reverb plugin, or do you really need another granular synthesizer? Like, it has to be very compelling. So it helps me to kind of stay focused, and it's got to sort of pass that test. The second question that I ask myself is, does the hardware look good? Is it well made? Now, sometimes that feels a bit superficial because we're all about function, and form is like fluff. It's like you must be an Apple user. But to me, especially when it comes to hardware, I do feel, me personally, that it's important for it to be aesthetically pleasing, like the knobs or the buttons. I own plenty of gear that feels plasticky and things like that. But when I come across a product that's kind of maybe does the same thing, but it's like really well made, like Bafako, for example, is a good example that comes to mind. I prefer their mixer, pay a little extra because I just like the way their industrial design looks. And to me, that's important. And I also found that it tends to retain its value over time. Not always, but sometimes. And so that's an important thing for me. So this third question is pretty obvious, but is it easy on the wallet? But more importantly, I think we have to consider, just because it's cheap, it doesn't mean that it's great value, and just because it's expensive doesn't mean it's a poor value, right? As we know, like some microphones or vintage gear, like synthesizers, they could be quite valuable. Not only did it provide great use over the years, but it has retained its value, all just because people who've probably purchased them, although maybe some are accidental, but others have seen value in those things and they kept it. And so, unlike, for example, if you have a laptop or a MacBook from 20 years ago, it's virtually worthless. Sometimes you have to buy a laptop, you got to buy a laptop. And so you would value that in terms of like frequency of use. But when it comes to like microphones, you may not use it all the time, but it provides value over long term. So like you have to consider like what type of gear is it? Not all $2,000 purchases is the same. Not all $10 purchases are the same either. So an important one, because I think this is where we get it wrong a lot, and it could end up hurting you tremendously. Number 4 is space and ergonomics. Before I make any purchase, I'm usually out there with my tape ruler and measuring and figuring out like where does it belong? And also more importantly, is it ergonomic? Is it reachable? And if it's not reachable, what's it doing? Like where is it gonna go? And I think if you don't think that through, and I certainly have, it could create a lot of friction when you try to integrate that new piece of gear into your studio. Another thing that I think about is like, what about power or cable or audio signal? Like, how is it going to get that? And the more I am thoughtful and mindful about this, the frictionless the integration of the new gear is when I try to integrate it to my studio. And the more I'm kind of flippant about it and make rash decisions, when you get the piece of gear, it's like, oh man, where is it going to go? How is it going to fit? And it becomes a chore, and it really does derail your creativity and your productivity. So I think this is really important that you have to consider. All right, so on to the gear list itself. Now, the gear that I'm listing here is not necessarily something that came out in 2021. Some were obviously earlier, but it has more to do with the gear that I've purchased this year, or it was like my go-to piece of gear for this year. So just as a disclaimer. Another thing of note is that, the price is going to vary quite a bit. And so, maybe at a future point, I'll do some kind of a price limitation. But this is just simply like the top 10 pieces of gear that I went to that I appreciated, that met those 4 things that I talked about and more, and exceeded my expectations for 2021. So starting at number 10 is the Moog Mother 32. Now, I know it's been around the block for a while, but it was a late purchase for me. And I want to say that this little guy has really helped me to rediscover my love for music. When you get older, you get kind of jaded and cynical about just music in general. And this piece of gear helped me to rediscover the joy and got me back into music making. And so that's huge. What can I say about the Mother 32? This isn't a full in-depth review or anything, but I gotta say, one thing, love the sound. It's got the classic Moog filter at a budget price. If you want that Moog sound, there's none like it. This is it. It's warm, it's fat, it's just amazing. My gripe is that the sequencer UX is awful. They might as well have just not put that in there, because you have to be like a 60s astronaut to figure this out. It's, I think, pretty terrible, and I know that there is some people who can use it. I certainly can't. So yeah, but besides that, the Mother 32, amazing. Okay, coming in at number 9 is the Sony FX3 full frame camera. So I think this camera, while it's not a piece of audio gear, has sort of spurred me on to want to start this YouTube channel. So I want to say that it's pretty inspirational in that sense. Also, I did that because it was a pretty expensive camera and it just wasn't being used as much as it needed to. So here we are. Now it takes incredible cinematic video, and it's got these great video-only features like big red button to make sure that you're in record mode and you're not wondering whether you're in record or not. Also, it's got the built-in XLR inputs, which is rare even at this price point, which seems expensive. You'll be hard pressed to find full frame cameras that have XLR inputs at this price range. So a big benefit, and I think it's very much a audio centric camera. Coming in at number 8 is the label maker. Yes, I'm sorry, this is a weird little thing, but I just have to share it because it's not all about just audio gear, but it's just gear in general. And in many ways, the label maker is indicative of the kind of thing that I find so valuable. I used to be super OCD about labels, but I found that because it took so long to make labels that I just stopped labeling things. By having this label maker right there, I can just use it, print it out, and get it to the things that I need it to. A good example a label maker comes really handy is things like this wall word, where I have no idea where this belongs. Like, I have no clue. And so by labeling it, I know exactly which device that this plugs into. Coming in at number 7 is my cello. Now, the cello is more emblematic of the things that I love to own. It's not that cellos are for everyone, but it's the concept of owning certain acoustic instruments and learning more about them and learning to play them. The cello is something that I rarely touch, but when I do, I absolutely love it. This was one of my pandemic goals, to learn to play the cello, and it's been fantastic. Now, I really went back and forth on the amount of budget I should spend on an instrument like this. Normally, I have a rule about acoustic instruments, it being like the highest quality possible. So I rather just like not get it than get something cheap. And that's one of the reasons why I just never owned the cello, because I just could never justify the kind of pricing you would have to pay for a decent cello that's somewhat professional. But in this case, during the pandemic, I said, heck, I'm gonna learn how to play the cello, and it's okay if I get something crummy. But in this case, I end up just kind of going with it with an online retailer, took a chance. So I gotta say that I got what I paid for. It wasn't spectacular. It has a hard time staying in tune. The tuning pegs are kind of goofy. The bridge is a little wonky. The finish is kind of like, not the best. There are a lot of blemishes, but you know, the amount of joy and kind of playtime I get from this particular instrument is just well worth the price tag, which wasn't that much. And so while it's not an heirloom piece, it certainly is doing its part and holding its own despite the size. I'm a complete noob when it comes to cello, but I approached it like a percussive instrument and also just learning some basic bowing techniques. And as you heard from my last few videos, I was able to sample some of the bowing effects into my granular synthesizer, and the sound is fantastic. It's absolutely amazing. And I love the fact that I could do that. And it sounds, in my opinion, way more organic, way more fresh than any sample libraries that I own or that I've heard. So super fun. Coming in at number 6 is the Rupert Neve Direct Box. Now, it doesn't have to be this particular direct box. Any high quality direct box would do, but it's one of those things that I think a lot of home studios neglect when in fact they probably need it more than professional studios. I again held off making a purchase like this because the good ones tend to be more expensive, but I didn't want to skimp, but finally was able to have enough money to purchase a couple of Neve direct boxes, and it's just one of the great purchases, and it gets used all the time. It's one of those things where I see a lot of home studios neglect it, but bringing line level signals up to a very hot signal is one of the most important things in a home studio because of all the noise, because of all the imperfections in your studio with electrical lines and other kinds of things. So if there was any place that could use a direct box, it's probably the home studio. Obviously, there are a lot of great direct boxes out there. This is just one of them that I liked. It has a specific coloring that I enjoy, and I'm familiar with Neve products, and so it definitely delivered. It has a lot more, I want to say, definition and strength to the signal that this particular box gives. And I think it's one of those things where it feels a little luxurious, to spend money on direct boxes when you're tempted to get other gear, more synth sources or whatever. But it's one of those basics where it's going to really pay dividends, and it really doesn't lose value over time. You can pretty much have this forever. So obviously I have to include a piece of Eurorack gear somewhere on this list. And so coming in at number 5 is Euclidean Circles from VPME. This was really tough. I love Eurorack, as you may or may not know from this channel, and picking one is obviously insane, but I just went back to the basics. I said, if I have to pick one of the most influential Eurorack that I own that kind of kickstarted a lot of other things, it was this thing, this little guy. All those things that made Eurorack great, it spawned out of Euclidean Circles. I give Euclidean Circles a huge amount of credit, or sequencers of that nature, this Euclidean rhythm structure. I give it a lot of credit for making music more joyous rather than tedious. It's very beginner friendly. It's so easy to use. And I want to say that it really helped me to see a whole new world of something that I could get excited about in the Eurorack space that didn't seem so tedious. In fact, it was inspirational and spontaneous and quite fast. I thought it was important to include a piece of software in this list. And so for my software pick, number 4, it's the Arturia Synth Bundle. If I had to pick one piece of audio software plugin that I use almost daily is this. Not only is this great value to put 5 licenses on 5 different machines, so you can put it on your mobile rig and on your laptop and so forth. It sounds great. It sounds fantastic. And because of software, the workflow is really fast, and with a bit of saturation and sort of like reamping using outboard gear, it sounds as good as anything. And finally, their software center, where it updates automatically, feels really modern and so easy to use and painless. Number 3 is cable ties. This is weird, I know, because it's so random. Whether it's the Velcro type, where it's like temporary and I can bundle things and then I can undo them and rebundle them, or these more permanent black ones where it's more secure. It's a thing that keeps me sane. You know, you have miles and miles of cables, and if you don't manage them properly, it is insane. You can get buried under them. So cable ties, using them wisely and using them effectively all over the place will keep you sane. Coming in at number 2 is my Neumann microphone, the KM 184 match pair. Now this thing is probably one of my favorite pieces of gear, and I think I mentioned this before, where it's expensive. It doesn't get used like crazy, but when I do need it, I'm always marveling at the sound quality, the sonic texture, the responsiveness, the versatility of it all. I think I pretty much put this on anything, you know, whether it's the cello, the flute, the guitar, acoustic guitar, nylon, everything. It can pretty much capture anything that you throw at it. I mean, the only thing that it probably can't do is like kick drums or other kind of things that require really low end, or if it's like really high SPL, it may have some issues. Coming in at number 1 is the GR1 Granular synthesizer. Once in a while, you get a piece of gear that is transformative. You know, I want to say that about Pro Tools. Maybe it's Logic, maybe it's your first microphone or the first compressor. For me, GR1 for 2021 has a very special place in my heart because it was the gear, a piece of gear that launched me into the world of, funny enough, Eurorack, but more importantly, like out of the box music making. Because it's a standalone synthesizer, because it's just dedicated to just do one thing and not do a bunch of other things, it was such a unique experience. In the beginning, I didn't know what to make of it. It felt kind of like a cheap computer, underpowered computer. But the more I got into it, the more I appreciated the power. And in fact, I don't even want it to be computer-like. I wish it had more knobs. I wish the screen was even smaller. The GR1 for me was the single most impactful piece of gear for 2021. It not only made me more interested about just granular synthesizers in general, but it allowed me and spurred me on to record my own samples. It allowed me to then discover preamps and microphones. So not only was the box great, but it had this cumulative, this additive effect of down the chain where I was doing other things in the service of wanting to put more cool, unique sounds into it. And so I ended up learning even more about other things like, oh yeah, that preamp was amazing, or that microphone sounds this way, or I practiced my cello a little bit more. It had all these other impactful things because of this single device. And not a lot of piece of gear can say that it can do that. It's, again, pricey, but not really, right? Because another cool thing I believe is that this GR1 is a standalone device. While it may get outdated, it still does its thing really well by itself. So I see it holding its value for some time. And I think that the functionality of what it does, although it's limiting in its own way, it's not a computer. It's priced almost like a laptop computer, but the way it works, the workflow, the UI, and the kind of thing it does, taking you outside the box and, in the standalone music environment, this standalone synthesizer environment, is just tremendous for allowing me to explore all these other things. Thank you guys for sticking around and watching this video. If you have any feedback or comments about your favorite gear for 2021, or your purchases, or your thought processes in general about how you make decisions, I would love to know and to learn from you guys, and we'll keep that discussion going. Until next time.